Hi, thank you guys. I think we will be waiting on a few more people to come in. But thank you so much, Victoria, too, for hosting us here at RJ Julia. We will be starting off with a little bit of a reading. I invited Victoria to read an excerpt from some of her work. Her memoir, A Body Across Two Hemispheres, was a beautiful read, a beautiful debut. And I'm really excited that you're here to do this event with me. And I hope you can read a little bit, and then I will read an excerpt of mine, and then we'll talk.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, for inviting me, Victoria and RJ Julia, for having us here today in Connecticut, which is your new home.
My new home state.
So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So I write a lot also about friendships and about growing up. I don't do it that much in fiction, more memoir. And when Christine said we're going to read a little piece, I kept on thinking what to read. So I chose this piece about girls growing up, their friendship, and also like the men that are always in the background. So, but apart from that, I also want to say that, just to clear anything up, because it might be a little bit confusing. So in Ecuador, this story is based in Ecuador, this essay is based in Ecuador. During Mardi Gras, we don't celebrate like other countries do. We actually celebrate with water wars. So I just didn't want to confuse anyone and be like, what's going on here? So just going to preface by saying that. So this is called Game Over. Wearing white is like carving a bullseye on our bodies, inviting men to spray us just so they can peek at our nipples or the floral etches of our bras, which means the first rule is never to wear white, light pink, or the soft yellow of newborn chicks. While it's better to steal one of our brother's vintage whatever concert t-shirts, we don't want to be confused for tomboys. We still wear our own shorts and tank tops, as long as we don't mind that these clothes might become trash after the hoopla, since there's a chance they'll be stained by ink or foam or mud water or, although we hope not, drain water and piss. Another rule is that we ignore babies, toddlers, people in wheelchairs, and the elderly. Everyone else is game. The third is under no circumstances do we leave our homes in sandals. Sandals provide no traction even when dry, and once soaked, forget it. The soles of our feet will swipe on the plastic as if slipping on a shiny oil puddle, and one of us will find ourselves on the ground, maybe bleeding, narrowly avoiding a stray dog's mound of dung a foot from our head. By then, everyone will pile water balloons and spray carioca foam until whoever's on the floor looks like a monster that sheds mounds of shaving cream, the smell of dish soap, and faint lavender, living on their skin until a shower purges it along with the town's dirt. This introduces the last rule. Always cover your face when you become a target. Close your eyes, shut your mouth, use your hands to cup your nose, because we're 15, 16, the yearly water fights during Carnival are still fun. And my mother begrudgingly lets me go, as the five of us leave with water balloons and foam cans to roam the streets, and tells us to be careful with the salvajes, the savages. You'd think everyone would be out and about in parades the way Brazilians do, but we don't celebrate with dances. We celebrate with water wars. Most stay at home so they don't get wet. But getting wet is the least of it. They stay home to avoid water balloons' harsh pop of plastic on their bodies. People save up for taxis to prevent getting stained by green ink, more radiant than a lizard's viridescent skin. Some get hurt. A friend almost loses an eye one year when a balloon strikes her face as she's sitting in a moving bus. The window open just wide enough to ruin her day. Cyclists get clobbered and collide into jaywalkers, causing a domino effect of gasps and gossip. We know people can be savages, but we're kids, and all we want to do is have fun. At first, this is just what happens. A bucket of water from a second floor drenches us, and we dash to a safe corner while saving our balloons for easy targets. Many of the businesses are closed, and the often bike-packed streets have been replaced by taxis that don't honk to see if we need a ride since we're dirty and wet. I hear laughter, "Got you," screams, kids playing with their parents, girls faking anger when doused, boys shouting, "Mohala, mohala," up and down the streets. We stay close, change our trajectory when a large group of men think we can't see their hidden garden house. After some blocks, we have no more balloons, just enough foam to douse barefoot preteens. We fix each other's runaway hairs, shout when we're about to get bombarded, and wipe the stained mascara from our cheeks. With fingertips soggy, we make our way to a side street where there's just a group of kids playing amongst themselves, too focused on their own battle to pay attention to us. We let our guard down, planning the rest of the path, wondering if we need to head to someone's home to rest and get more foam. I look up toward windows, to the crooks of where walls meet doors, in case someone is waiting to surprise us with a water gun. But I ignore the cars speeding on the street while we stroll on the walkway. It's just a driver, no passenger, and no windows down. But it's too late once I realize what's happening, and we all shove each other to where our instincts deem is safer, trying to make ourselves small. At first, I assume he loses control, but the car halts a foot from us, our hands grabbing another's arms. A chain of linked teenage girls with clothes soaked, skin slimy and damp, swarming with goosebumps, not from the water, but the fright. He gets out, with half the car on the sidewalk, the other half on the street, and glances at us and laughs and laughs and laughs as he strides to a house, moving as quick and slow as watching a water balloon being flung from across the street. My friends shout, call him an animal, a pendejo, while I pull them away in case he races back to do more than a feint. I get a sudden urge to bathe, remove the trail of grime on my neck, and the dyes on my skin that I haven't yet seen. Everything feels wrong, as if I know my hair is in disarray, as if I should have stayed dry at home and not sacrificed my least favorite shirt. And I look at my knobby knees and wonder why he wanted to scare us. When we amble to the end of the block, pops of burst pastel plastic littering the pavement, I feel as if we're too grown, maybe not in mind, but in bodies, to be playing this game. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's lots of, I think that pairs well with some of the scenes in my book too. Lots of catcalling and guys, much older men,
Yes.
viewing very young girls as mature women. Yeah. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from The Girls and Queens. It's from the very beginning of the novel, or early on. The story, if you don't know, is about the fierce loyalty and friendship between two young Latinas growing up in Queens, Brisma and Kelly, which is challenged when one of their ex-boyfriends is accused of sexual assault. The story is told in alternating timelines between 1996 and 2006, and a little bit of the 2001 thrown in. And this is going to be from 1996. And the girls are about 11. On the third straight day of a New York City heat wave that July, Kelly and I retreated to the cool, damp air of her basement to read the latest installment in my fan fiction saga based on the X-Files. Kelly flipped the last page closed, revealing dollar signs and zeros. The manuscript was printed on the backs of old medical bills from Mommy's job at St. Vincent's. The maintenance men always knew to save a box for her to take home before trashing them. So, Kelly said, blowing silky strands of black hair from her face, the chick is Mulder, or I snatched it out of her hands. Never mind, I said, rolling it up and shoving it into my back pocket. No, Kelly said, I liked it. I tugged at the hem of my shorts, which were already too tight from the beginning of the summer, and sat down. I'd grown several inches taller and fuller than Kelly in the last few months. Forget it. Kelly humored my fan fiction, especially when I wrote her into it, but couldn't be bothered to watch much television beyond what was on at my house when she came over. I'm a liver, she had said, not a watcher. You're an internal organ? I asked, eliciting a groan. How are you such a nerd sometimes, yo? Our forearms on the cold concrete floor in the one furnished room of the basement where her older brother used to make out with girls. We listened to Boyz II Men cassette tapes on his boombox for a while before we decided to explore the dark corners of the cellar. Kelly and I regularly searched for love letters or mixtapes or condom wrappers, anything to piece together the intimate lives we knew the adults around us must have lived. Toward the back of the house, where cellar doors swung out onto the concrete backyard, a washer and dryer sat underneath lines of rope hung from the exposed wooden beams of the ceiling to dry delicates. That day, we found the silk and cotton boxers that had come out of Timothy's wash hanging on the lines. "Ooh la la," Kelly said as she tugged a black pair with red kisses on it down from the clothespin on the line. She held it up in front of her face and made it dance between pinched fingers. I laughed. "How the hell he got these kind of boxers?" I asked. "You think your mom bought them for him?" Kelly let the pair drop from her fingers and sucked her teeth. "My mom don't buy him shit," she said, looking up at the line for another one. "Do you think he's cute?" Kelly rolled her eyes as she ripped another silk pair down and threw it on my face. I tore it off and tossed it back at her. "Yo, that's disgusting." "What?" she said, cocking her brow. "I heard you say you thought he was cute." "Did not." I leaned on the clothesline with my right arm and caught myself in the mirror above the sink. I sucked in my stomach and adjusted the tank top over my chest. Mommy had graduated me from sports bras to the polyester sheen of Conway's back wall a few weeks ago for my 11th birthday, and the underwire dug uncomfortably into my ribcage. I asked if you thought he was. Kelly pretended to ignore me and ran her hands along the line of boxers as if she were a rich woman admiring her art collection. "Besides," I shrugged, "even if I did think he was cute, I don't want to rub my face in his underwear." Kelly sighed, tired of me, I could tell. I got the sense oftentimes that I was too dumb for her or too prudish. Too naive for sure. "What's the big deal, you baby?" she said, gesturing toward the washing machine. "It's not like they're dirty." She ripped down a cotton pair with a silkscreen print of Porky Pig on the butt and threw it at me, but that time I caught it. She smiled and opened her arms wide, grabbing onto the lines overhead and ran her face across each pair of shorts, one long motorboat through a sea of his unmentionables. I laughed at her audacity, her brazen disregard for other people's personal property. I wished I could be more like Kelly. "What are you doing?" His voice was deep and reverberated against the low ceiling of the cellar, stopping my laughter cold. Timothy stood behind us with an empty laundry basket at his hip. His face was hard. I couldn't quite read if he was mad at us, but there was heat in his eyes, an excited self-awareness of the scene he'd just walked into. I looked at Kelly, but she didn't look scared. She looked amused, defiant, as if she'd been expecting this. "Laundry," she shrugged, a blue and orange pair of Mets boxers hanging off her fingertip. He snatched it from her and threw it in the plastic basket at his hip. Just as quickly, he grabbed her wrist in his thick fist and twisted it behind her. Kelly was so short she only came up to his chest. He pulled her close to him. "You want to do my laundry?" he asked, his voice frighteningly intimate. It wasn't the same voice he used when he played his harmonica for us on the stoop. Kelly didn't look at me or him, but at the line of clothes above her. She didn't seem shocked or afraid at all, only embarrassed. She tucked her chin to her shoulder to turn toward him. "You're hurting me again," she said low, as if reminding a scene partner of their lines. "Not so hard." Timothy turned to raise his eyebrows at me. "You want to feel my boxers?" He dropped the laundry basket onto the concrete floor, and the sound echoed throughout the basement. Underneath it, I could hear the metal of his belt buckle coming undone. I gasped and took a step back, my bare heel banging into the empty washing machine behind me. It was like a gong, the sound of its quivering hollow walls echoing through the house and snapping Kelly out of her dim fog. She elbowed Timothy away from her hard. He staggered back, but trained his hungry eyes on me instead. "I saw you," he said, his right arm reaching for me, the alarm of leather and metal sounding off at his waist. "You wanted this, too." His fingers barely grazed my neck before I ducked out past him and ran for the far back door. I made it up the warped wooden steps and out into the yard where Frances sat with a freshly lit Virginia Slim. I ran past her and past the broken fence, losing one of my chunky jelly sandals in the process. When I got to the dugout, I hugged my knees at the far edge of the dirt lot where the tall weeds grew strong and thick from the ground. It wasn't until Kelly followed shortly thereafter, trailed by Frances's coughing wails for us to come back and apologize for being rude to Timothy, that I realized I was still clutching a laundered pair of his underwear. Kelly lay panting, back flat on the ground next to me. "Has he done that before?" She cut her eyes at me. There I was again, so silly, so naive. She propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes still on mine, sizing me up. We practice, she said. Practice what? I asked. Shh. She clamped her perpetually wet palm over my mouth. Kissing, she said. We practice kissing. It's like a game. I stared at her, not comprehending what she was saying, even though on some level I had suspected it for some time. But he's almost 18, I said. Kelly lowered herself back onto the ground, and I could feel the wall go back up between us. If we listened, we could just make out Frances apologizing to Timothy and offering to buy him new clothes. Occasionally, she would shout out in our general direction, "Come get your shoe!" or "You lost your shoe, dingbat!" And she'd laugh, and we'd hear Timothy laugh, too. I dug into the cool soil with the bare toes of my non-sandaled foot and imagined myself as a worm crawling into the earth. Suddenly, Kelly scrambled to her knees, snatched the boxers that I'd been gripping in my fist, and pawed at the ground like a dog with a bone. What are you doing? What are you doing? I flicked dirt off my thighs and peeked back through the weeds, my body still humming with adrenaline. Why don't you just stuff it inside the lunchbox with everything else? I can't leave this out, Kelly grunted. It's too dangerous. I have to hide it. Her hands were claws, the star-shaped plastic ring on her finger collecting more and more soil like a miniature trowel. Dangerous for who? I asked. But Kelly only lifted a wrist to wipe sweat from her brow. Beneath the cars whizzing by and the cicadas above, I could hear Frances's lighter catch in the distance. I pulled myself to my knees alongside Kelly and grabbed clumps of earth to pile on top of the garish fabric. I wanted to bury this moment and forget it as soon as possible. But Kelly, it appeared, was burying treasure. She hadn't put the boxers in the lunchbox with our other naughty items. This was something else, something precious, and something that was hers alone. I got to run away, I understood, but she was stuck in that house. So I helped her, and I clawed so deep that I was cleaning soil out from under my nails for a week afterward. We lay back down over the fresh earth, panting. I tried to synchronize my breathing with hers so that our lungs functioned as one beast hiding in the bush. I squeezed her wrist so hard I felt ligaments press against the bone beneath her skin, but I tried to still my nerves and match her pulse with mine. If we could share a soul, I'd felt, a body, if I could give her mine, we'd survive. We'd make it through. She turned to look at me and shook her head. You can still smell it, she said, motioning back toward the house with a puckered mouth. Her cigarette.
Thank you so much for reading that excerpt.
Yeah.
So now I have a few questions.
Sure.
They're also very writerly questions because I'm always interested in the process of a writer.
Sure.
So the first question I have is, how did the idea of the Girls and Queens arise?
Mm-hmm.
And can you provide us more insight on the writing process, especially the alternating timelines?
Sure. So the idea first came to me, actually, with my brother-in-law. And he doesn't realize this, I'm sure. So we were lucky enough to win, my brother-in-law's in the audience for recorded people later on. We were lucky enough to win tickets to see the Mets play in the World Series in 2015. And the Mets don't usually go to the World Series, you understand. So in 2015, we were there at the new stadium, Citi Field, and like getting a drink beforehand. And being there was fun and wonderful, but it had me thinking back to the last time that the Mets had gotten far enough into the playoffs, which was in 2006. And so they made it like to Game 7 of the National League Championship, so like as close as you can get to then fail. Which was a heartbreaking loss, but I had a lot of nostalgia and love for that team, which were a heavily Latino team, deliberately a heavily Latino team, structured by the general manager at the time, who was an Afro-Latino that grew up in the neighborhoods that I had grown up in. And so I really was interested in the idea of somehow writing that love. It was a kind of an obsession for me way back then, writing that into a story. You know, how would it to depict what it was like for kids, working class kids, second generation and first generation immigrant kids living in Queens, the most diverse borough or the most diverse county in the United States, to see their hometown team, the New York Mets, actually look like them. And not just that, for the team, for the ownership, or for the people in charge, to be marketing to us for the first time.
So first came the love of the game.
Yes. Yes. And that was in 2015. And then shortly after that, I didn't know how to write. I thought that was a short story, maybe,
Okay.
so I didn't know that was a novel yet. But shortly after, the Brock Turner case was getting a lot of attention. He was an athlete that attacked, a college athlete that attacked Chanel Miller on a college campus. And that, I was following that case a lot, and I grew fascinated by the women, by the people, but specifically the women that defended him. And that's when my focus on women defending abusers despite clear evidence of bad behavior came into focus. And I realized then that I had a bigger story to tell. Like, I had a novel-length story to tell, marrying my baseball nostalgia, my Mets nostalgia, with exploring what happens in young women's life, a young woman's life that turns her into an adult that will defend obvious abusers.
Yes.
And that's another reason. That's another reason why it's called The Girls in Queens, because of course it's specifically about these girls that live in Queens, but also it's about what happens to us as girls that turns us into the queens or adults that we are. I'm trying to push that double entendre.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the alternating timeline, did that
Yes.
come after, did that come at the beginning of the drafting process, or was it more towards the end?
So I knew that I was going to have 2006 be the main action of the story, because that's when the Mets got as far as they did. Yeah. And I knew that I was going to have the 90s as well, because I wanted to explore what would happen to have adults act the way that they are. And I realized the Mets also made it to the World Series in 2000. So I tried and didn't win. And so I tried to work that in as the third timeline. And it's touched on, but the story grew beyond the Mets, well beyond the Mets as I was writing it. So as I wrote into the book, I realized I had 96, 2000, 2001, and 2006. And it wasn't until I broke it all out into, more or less an outline, like broad strokes of each chapter on literally index cards, and had it in front of me, that's when I realized that I could literally alternate between chapters, and that keeping the main plot in 2006 and flashing back sort of would mirror a trauma victim's memory. So in fact, when you look back on the novel, the first half of the novel is the story that Brisma has woven for herself to survive. That's what she's told herself. And then the last half of the book is the seedier aspects that she's mentally edited out, that she's forced to reckon with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for that explanation. I
Sure.
loved it. I do feel, now that you've explained, the Mets are the heart of the book, but I still feel
Yes.
that Brisma and Kelly are the soul of the book. Were they always these two girls and then women, or did you have a different character? Did it always start with these two women? How did that come to be?
I think pretty early on it was these two girls. At the very beginning, I was focused on Brian and Brisma.
Okay.
But I quickly realized that it was going to benefit the story to have multiple examples of how we internalize misogyny and learn to align with the patriarchy and the power.
Yes.
And so that's when I incorporated I turned my attention to Kelly and Brisma together. And in fact, in the first few drafts of the manuscript, the friends Kelly and Brisma were almost irredeemably mean to each other. I needed to go back in several revisions with, I had written out on a piece of paper and put above my desk, small kindnesses in friendship. Yes.
That's mean.
Yeah, that's mean, yeah. And I knew, I tried to write towards that, to incorporate more of that compassion and the gentleness into their interactions. And I think that really helped me, that feedback really helped me to soften them, because so much of what I wanted to write about was how growing up in these conditions and these communities, certainly in an urban area, like girls adopt these tough personas and become tough themselves too to survive. Yes. And I knew I had to dismantle that a little bit, right? You had to see the progression of how they treated each other, with that underneath their interactions is love, is a deep love, even if they're calling each other names.
Yeah.
And so I needed to balance that with, I needed to balance the toughness with the gentle love for each other.
That's so lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there is a line in the book that I feel like really encapsulates the novel, and I'm going to read it out loud. It's, "Mommy was always so scared of what could happen to me walking home late at night, as if strangers were ever the only threat." So I feel like we conflate, as a society, we conflate safety with the people that we know, you know? And I think that your novel does such an outstanding job showing how difficult it can be to reconcile that we've known this kid, this child that grows up into a man, and they are dangerous. You know, they are out there becoming predators. So can you comment on this particular line and how it relates to your novel as a whole?
Sure. Right, so you gave me a peek at that question before. Yeah. So I just want to say what I first thought of when you said that was when I was at the very early stages of researching this, I spoke with a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and I asked her, have you ever spoken with like family members of somebody accused of rape, or you know, like a convicted of rape? Like, what is it like for the family unit? And like, she wasn't really giving me a straight answer, and then she sort of broke down and she was like, the family units are fucked. Like the people, they're not in therapy. Those people are not in therapy. And so it wasn't a satisfactory answer for my research, right? But I wanted to explore that, right? Like, what do those families look like then? Yes. And so, because from my own personal experience, like, there was a point during the writing of this novel too, that informed the inspiration, where I realized in my 20s, let me back up. Growing up, and as a teenager in high school, there were many girls that had older boyfriends, very older boyfriends. Yes. And in my 20s, at some point, I looked around at the guys that I had grown up with, and I realized that, like, oh, they're kind of dating a younger girl. and to realize that, like, those older guys are now the people around me, the people that I grew up with. And so that this boogeyman that we were taught to fear, that like some guy lurking in the shadows is the real threat, when in fact they could really be the people we grew up with. So yeah, I was absolutely exploring that in the book. And of course, I mean, you're right. I think that is a good line to encapsulate the novel, because the parents in the novel routinely overlook the literal threats inside their homes.
You just read out loud the scene,
right.
Timothy,
right.
which in that moment doesn't seem like Kelly's mom is like really aware that this boy/man, right? Because he's on the cusp of being 18 years old.
Right.
And the damage that he could do living in their
Right.
home.
Right.
Because, the people that are dangerous are out on the street.
Mm-hmm. Or even that it's not damage.
It's not damage.
Yeah, like, there's a point later on where Francis says to Kelly something like, "You think you're special," and so what happened in Francis's life? That it's this question that I'm raising. Like, what happened in her life that she turns around and says to her daughter, "You think you're special because you're getting this kind of attention," and seeing her daughter as a competitor.
Yeah. And also, like, it happens to all of us.
Right. This is
it's
life.
common. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's another aspect of telling this story about Latinas in a community of color, right? Kids or women of color or young girls of color are viewed as an adult much earlier than we are, including by our elders, by our community. And that is weaponized against us. If people haven't done the work, their own internal work, we're viewed as having the responsibility of turning down an older man or not getting drunk with a guy. It's always our responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the aspects of your book that I found fascinating is that the characters feel human, they feel real, they're not two-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, especially with, I feel like, the men,
Mm-hmm.
there are men who help women or girls get out of dangerous situations, and then those same men endanger other women. And I felt like it was a great way of showing that, this person's not 100% an angel.
Mhm.
And this other person's not 100% the devil.
Mhm.
It has like bits and pieces, and you have like Brisma's father and his absence, and you have Brian helping Kelly, but then doing this to someone else, and who Pablo was when he was a kid, and then who he became as an adult, and how this kind of idea of changing or being very different based on who you meet and how you act with certain people. So how difficult or how easy was portraying those nuances and portraying these people as not just black and white, but the gray areas of each character?
How difficult was it? That was absolutely a goal of mine, right? I wanted to play in this gray area. Because I am talking about the fact that there's danger within our communities, within our family units, whatever. And humans are not ever all bad or all good. And it's also well documented that abusers like to, or know who to treat better for social collateral.
Yes.
And it's a very real experience for the people that are treated well, just as it's a very real experience for the victims that are treated horribly. And it was important to show that spectrum for the characters, and specifically with Pablo, I wanted to show that that growth is possible.
Yes.
That humans evolve, that we can change as long as you're open and willing to be taking a hard look. And that's that's like my ultimate wish for the book, is that everybody that reads it takes as an invitation to look into their own lives, their own paths, in ways that they could have helped somebody or didn't, and to think about how we can treat each other better.
Yes. And one of the reasons that I asked this particular question is that not too long ago there was, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and this whole court trial, and they invited Kate Moss,
Of course.
to speak.
Yeah.
About her relationship with Johnny Depp, and it really made me think about your book and about how, this is so true. Like, yes, he probably wasn't abusive towards you, but that does not mean that he was not abusive towards someone else.
Right.
And I feel like your novel does a great job of showing that.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say, not only is it possible that he was, I don't want to talk about Johnny Depp, but not only was it possible that he was not abusive.
I'm sorry that I brought him up.
Not only is it possible that he was not abusive to her, it's also very possible that Kate Moss doesn't realize that he was abusive to her. Like, that's another aspect of this novel too.
And we see that in both Kelly and Brisma. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question before we open it up to Q&A from the audience. So I write about sexual assault through the lens of memoir, and you write about it through the lens of fiction. So writing about sexual assault and, you know, trauma from it is very difficult, regardless of whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So I was wondering about how your self-care process was throughout the time that you wrote this novel, and what you would recommend to other writers that want to delve in these very difficult topics in their own writing.
That's a good question, and I hope I have a good answer. I mean, it is difficult. Like, you know, it is difficult to go to these dark places, and especially writing this or revising it heavily during the pandemic, where I couldn't really escape the house with my family. It was hard to, like, just literally have the space, like a door to close, to say, like, I need to like, go to this really dark place. I can't make chicken nuggets right now.
And then how do you get out of it too, right?
Yeah. So for some of the darker stuff, I needed to like go to a friend's house. I rented for a huge revision I was doing. I rented a room at a hotel for a weekend. It's because I needed to, like, be away completely, and that helped. Right. Self-care. I find it's always helpful to have my body moving, which is not to say, like, some sort of organized. I'm really not good about exercise, okay? But just literally moving, like doing a few yoga poses, really helps, because I will sometimes feel like the heaviness in my body. And then also you're sitting at a computer or at a notebook. So just getting up and moving, and trying to either listen to music that helps you, or maybe nothing at all. Maybe you want some peace and quiet, just to have a few moments afterward, maybe like 15 minutes even, is helpful to transition back to reality. But it's very difficult. Do you have tips on that from your experiences?
I would say that I do the same thing, that I have to be alone.
Yeah.
And get into this very hard place. Something else that I don't do is that once I'm like, this is done, or once it's published, I don't read it again.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to go back to that moment. It's also really hard to read things out loud, you know, in front of an audience, because it's such a difficult topic. But I would say moving for me too. I like to go on hikes to clear my mind, even if it's just a really short hike, because you need to get into it, and then you need to find a way out.
Right.
And both processes are very hard.
I'll also say that not everything needs to be for public consumption.
Oh no.
Right. Like, there's private journaling, like you know, that being said, if you do want to write about it and share it with people, we're saying that it is difficult, but also I was at a reading of Clavis Natera with Naima Coster.
Okay.
And one of them said, which I'm paraphrasing, don't be afraid for the writing to hurt. You know, don't be afraid to write into the pain, because that's probably going to be impactful on the other side of it.
Exactly.
And so if it hurts, it's okay. You're okay, you're safe to be writing that.
Yes.
Like, remember, keep that in mind.
And at the end of the day, it truly is your choice.
Right.
Whether you feel comfortable or not sharing it or publishing in a book. I have had certain pieces published under a different name, just because I'm like, that's it. I know.
Yeah.
And which, you know, kind of pushes away other issues or problems that could arise.
Sure.
But I definitely agree, and I think that, especially, not because of Me Too, but in general, these are stories that I think that other women, other young ladies need to hear. Because, when I was younger, I didn't think that other people got sexually assaulted. Like, nobody talked about it. It was not something that you brought up in any way, not in a novel, not in memoir. So I'm really, really glad that you wrote this for us and for everyone listening and on the audience today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So does anybody have a question?
I have a question.
Oh yeah? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I'm very excited for you, and it's great to feel it. It's real.
Very
so,
cool.
Yeah, congrats.
Thanks.
As a Mets fan, there's a lot of memories listed from the book. Some
I hope
very
I
painful.
hope I got them all right. Yeah.
So, what was the hardest part, whether it's a chapter or just maybe a process-oriented part of writing the book, and what part to you was the most fun about the book?
Oh, the most fun was time traveling to Shea Stadium.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Oh.
Just in case
Sure.
it wasn't.
Sure.
So the question was, what was the hardest part of writing this novel, and what was the best, like the most fun part of the novel?
Right, and the most fun part for me was time traveling to Shea Stadium to try and like remember where things were located, or were the steps concrete? Are they always concrete in a stadium? Yeah. And like getting to rewatch some games, which I know you're very familiar with that activity. So that was fun. Challenging. We've covered the two big challenges. So the first challenge was to figure out the structure, to fall into the right structure. And once I did figure it out, it felt like unlocking or solving a puzzle, right? And that was a nice day. And then the other challenge was like going to the dark places, and actually the hardest section of the book I had to write, the part that was most difficult for me to write emotionally was after Brisma has made a decision with how she's going to act once she's learned new information, and she makes a choice to like stand in solidarity. That was the hardest one for me to write, because I had to like dig deep to think, to get clear on what her intentions really were, and what did it mean for her, and how did Brisma really feel about it. Was she scared? Was she excited or like content? And I had to rewrite that a few times with the help and direction of my editor too. She drilled that down with me, like, what do you really want here for her? And so I had to do some soul searching. But in the end, I think I settled on that Brisma was looking for the supportive community, and she finds it. So that was the most difficult part, yeah. I think strangely, because there are other really dark parts of the novel, but that's what was most difficult for me to write.
No, but that seems interesting to me, because I think it's really hard when someone realizes what they went through, especially sexual assault, to be like, am I going to act on it, or I'm just going to keep it inside myself?
Right.
And that's really hard to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a bookstagrammer, and one of the topics that we talk a lot about is publishing and how white publishing can be. And so I was just curious, as a Latina author and getting a story like this made and out there, like, what could you just speak about your publishing journey and what your experience was like with that, with just getting the book published?
Sure. It's very difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you a writer also?
I'm not a
No.
writer now.
So there's been tons of essays and think pieces about how it is difficult to get your work published. I feel very lucky and grateful that my agent and my editor are both women of color. My agent is Ecuadorian. And my editor is Asian. And I also, several people on my team at HarperCollins, at Harper Via, were people of color too. And they really looked out for me. And I'm very grateful. There were times where they would remind me, like, don't make any edits that you don't want to, that you're not comfortable with, because we want to maintain your voice here. We're not trying to whitewash it.
Right.
They didn't say that, that's me. And so, that being said, it's still very difficult to get an agent. It's still very difficult to, even with my agent who's amazing, we went through 2 rounds of submissions. So you have an agent, and then the agent shops it around to editors. And so we went through 2 rounds until we got a very excited interest from Harper Via, and that sort of started a little bit of an auction, which was great. But from the time that I started pitching the novel in 2018, I then signed with my agent in 2020. And then in 2021, we finally sold it to Harper Via. But for any writers of color that are looking to break in, to get past the gatekeepers, I mean, keep trying, keep hustling, and you have to make rejection your friend. Like, that is for any writer. Like, rejection is the name of the game. You're going to be rejected all the time.
Right.
And you can't take it personally. I will say another thing about that is that a lot of the rejections we were getting from editors were, this is well written, but I just don't connect with it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's a tough hurdle, right? Because reading is subjective, writing is subjective, and if the industry is 92% white, then they're not going to connect with it. Like, a lot of people are not going to connect with it that are looking to buy it to publish. So we certainly need more diversity within the publishing industry. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I think that both of our process to the first book is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I didn't have an agent. In my case, I started my MFA program because I said I have an idea for a memoir, and I don't know how to put it together, and I need help with that. And so that was my focus. My thesis for my MFA was my book. And then my university, every 2 years, I believe, the MFA program, they have something called the Fairfield Book Prize. And they've had it, I think, about 5 times before 2020, when they opened up the new call for submissions. So in those 5 times, I didn't have an agent. I hadn't looked for an agent because I graduated in July of 2020. And then the submission, this call for submissions, was in December. So I was still working on it. I wasn't finished, and I didn't have an agent. And I also feel like my book has a lot of flash nonfiction, and I feel like the industry is still warming up to that. It has been warming up a lot, but still not completely. And they opened it up, and the 5 winners before me were all novels. So I was not going to submit it. A friend actually from the program really pushed me to submit my what I had. And I was like, no, like, statistically, right now we're talking about 92%. I was like, 100% of these books published have been novels, and I don't have a novel. And they're like, please send it. And so, fortunately, my book was the first nonfiction book published through the Fairfield Book Prize, which is great. And then it was published earlier this year in March through a Connecticut press called Woodhull Press. Yes. So that's how it's a very different process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but we still need those voices, the voices of color. But like you said, to get to the table and to get published, it's hard. You know, it's a years-long endeavor. You just mentioned in 2018, then in 2020, then in 2021. So it does take, I think, from however you're going through in this path, to have a lot of patience and
Yeah.
to not give up after rejection.
Right. I think you have to really believe in the voice that you're bringing to the table. You know, your unique voice is needed out there. Oh.
Yes, whoever wants to go
I
first.
just had kind of a follow-up question
Sure.
about the question that you had asked. So you had said that you found a great group of people that kind of told you to stay true to what you wanted to write and what you wanted to be heard. Did you have a lot of pressure? Was it a big fear of yours that there would be a lot of people trying to whitewash what you were writing?
Well, I think that the journey to publication has been a struggle. I mean, not to I want to make this clear every time I talk about it. Breaking through the barriers of each gatekeeper has been a struggle, and so I was always expecting there to be a fight. I mean, just as a woman of color, I've always expected to have to like struggle a little bit in getting my voice heard. So I expected, I thought that there might be some pushback. And I did get some, I and other writers I know have gotten advice to sometimes make your writing more palatable for different audiences or mainstream audiences. But I needed, I was very clear, I think, about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And for the most part, I think I did that in this novel, which is not to say that I'm not open to collaboration, you know, with my editorial team. It was almost like a relief to have collaborators at that point. But yeah, so I think I'm always ready for a fight, period.
I love it. I know that there was a question.
I was gonna say something.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hold on. Sorry, caught me in a moment here.
That's all right.
Doing my job, actually.
That's okay. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, so I read your book.
Thank
and I remember
you.
you came in downstairs and I rang you out and you handed it to me.
Oh
And I
yes.
was like, I'm gonna write you a book.
Oh, thank you.
I am, and I swear I knew I was gonna like the book when I met you, and I did. I really enjoyed the book, and I wanted to say, just basically when you were talking about what some people had mentioned to you that they liked it, it was well written, but they couldn't connect, and I'm like, what? So
Yeah.
what I want to say is like, I may not have the same background, you know what I mean? But like, I loved hearing your voice because it was different. Like, and it didn't sound like a lot of other voices that I hear in a lot of the books that I'm reading. And so it was really refreshing. And it was, and besides, isn't that like the point of why you're reading too? Like to open up that,
Yeah.
you know, but in so many ways I did connect. And I wanted to say that because I was like, you know, I grew up in the 90s, I graduated in the 90s, and then like a lot of the, you know, like with all this stuff that you're talking about with the boys in high school, and like it made me stop and think.
Yeah.
And be like, yeah, a lot of that stuff like was like, wow, yeah, like, and it made me kind of realize like things are changing, like, right? Because
Yeah.
we're becoming more aware that like those things weren't okay.
Yeah.
That like, even if it was like comments or if it was certain things that you go back to now and you're like, was that okay? That, like, maybe that wasn't okay, you know? But like, and so it takes people like other voices like yours to be like Brisma, you know, to be like brave and to be like, you know what, like, because I know in one point she talked about at first they didn't connect with the other victim because they're like, she's white, and what is she just blaming him? And they connected with Brian, right, because he's an insider and he was their friend, and I was like, oh yeah, because you know, again, I remember certain situations in high school where, like, you hear two sides of the story and you know the person, you're like, no, that person would never do that, you know? But,
Right.
like, and then also, like, the idea that you were like, Prisma said, we go through this all the time. Like, who is she to go? Who is she to say, like, that's not right? We deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
So, like, it really put, like, things in perspective
Yeah.
for me about, like, you know, how she grew up and
Mhm.
what, like, you know, the girls in Queens had to deal with and how they had to grow up quicker, like you said.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
just so, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And as with most books that I really enjoy, I have a hard time writing the shelf talker because you have to write it on like a piece of paper this big.
Yeah.
How do I say all of this stuff? Because
Yeah.
it was an important book
Oh.
in so many ways, and I was like, I don't know how to put that on this little shelf top.
Yeah.
So, but I really wanted to, I was like, and this is like random that I'm working tonight up here, and I'm like, yes, I'm working.
Oh,
I need
nice.
to tell her.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Oh, don't need this much. But thank you, because I mean, I really enjoyed the book, and I'm so glad that like your voice, you have a really great voice. I look forward to other books that you write.
Oh, thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate everything you said, and that it prompted introspection about like what did we accept and why are we accepting it, or what are we accepting today. The Brett Kavanaugh, I don't know what it was. It's not a trial. It was some testimony when he was being sworn in.
Senate, like the Senate hearings. Isn't that?
The hearing. It was
Yes.
a hearing.
Mhm.
With Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, that happened during while writing the book. But that was an example of being in, you know, modern times, and seeing so many women come to his defense too. And I remember very vividly seeing like a CNN roundtable of just like everyday women, I think. And one of them said like, you know, what he's being accused of is nothing. Like you don't know what I saw in high school. And I was like, well, why? Why are you using that as a defense? Like, let's talk about that. So that's absolutely what I tried to portray in this novel. And so thank you so much for saying that you were thinking about that too.
Oh
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. And I definitely connected with all the 90s stuff.
Yeah.
The jelly.
The jelly, yeah.
The jelly, yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Are there any other questions?
No? Okay. I just want to thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, thank you.
I enjoyed
Victoria.
your novel so much,
Yeah.
and I can't wait till you sign my copy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll sign copies. Thank you. Thank you so much.